There's something surreal about being told you're trespassing on your own ranch, especially when the person saying it is a 22-year-old with a clip-on tie guarding a HOA auction where your barn is being sold as a rustic event space. That's how my week started. I didn't lose my temper. I showed them the deed. Then the HOA president called security, and that's when the war began. There was a velvet rope stretched across my driveway like it was the entrance to some kind of cowboy country gala, except no one had invited the cowboy. Where my grandfather's cattle trough used to sit, someone had set up a valet stand, complete with a collapsible umbrella, clipboard, and a skinny kid in sunglasses asking people if they preferred sparkling or still. And right on my damn porch, the same porch where I used to sit with my dad and sort cattle tags, stood a woman in blush heels, auctioning off my land like it was a bottle of boutique Napa Rosé. I didn't need to read the sign to know who she was. Diana Brookstone, president of the Evergreen Summit HOA, queen of bylaws, master of weaponized smiles, and the reason I almost spilled my coffee while slamming the truck into park. I was supposed to be gone for 4 days, a quick consulting trip in Denver, one client, one presentation, in and out. Ricky, my ranch hand, had strict instructions. Feed the cattle, check the north fence line, don't let the well run dry. When I left, things were fine. Hell, more than fine. The ranch was peaceful, humming in that quiet Texas rhythm you only get when the cows are chewing and the wind cooperates. But as I turned off County Line Road and saw Teslas and Audis parked like it was a damn avocado toast convention, my gut twisted. The sign read, Legacy Ridge Redevelopment Showcase, presented by Evergreen Summit HOA. And in front of it all, like the ringmaster of a suburban circus, was Diana herself, wearing a white blazer sharp enough to slice drywall and grinning like she already owned the deed to my soul. I didn't even make it 20 feet before a kid in a clip-on tie blocked my path. I'm sorry, sir, he chirped, his voice cracking like a freshman choir solo. This is a private investor event. I stared at him for a second, unsure whether to laugh or cry. I live here, I said, each word measured like I was trying not to spit. You're standing on my land. Before he could respond, Diana raised her voice and waved toward the tent behind her. Security, please escort this man off the premises. He's not authorized to be here. I blinked. Authorized? I barked, turning fully toward her. I'm Ethan Walker, and this ranch has been in my family since 1942. Diana strolled down the steps, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning me like I was a defective product in her HOA catalog. You've been absent for more than 30 days, Mr. Walker, she said, voice sweet as Splenda and twice as artificial. Per bylaw 7.31, the property is considered dormant and under provisional redevelopment review. My jaw clenched so hard I could feel my molars grind. I was gone for days. The moment hung heavy like the air before a summer thunderstorm. Then came the sirens, 2 sheriff units pulling in slow, lights off, tires crunching gravel like a threat. Deanna pointed theatrically like she was casting a play. That man is disrupting a community event and making attendees feel unsafe. One deputy stepped out and looked at me. Mr. Walker, it was Deputy Harris. He recognized me from the Veterans Day parade last year. I handed him a laminated copy of the deed I kept in the glove box for emergencies, not expecting it to be this kind of emergency. He examined it, nodded slowly, and turned to Deanna. Ma'am, unless you've got legal documents that override this deed, I'm afraid you'll have to pause this event. For the first time, Deanna's smile twitched. She leaned in and whispered so close I could smell her citrus perfume. This isn't over, Ethan. Then she turned and strutted off the porch, heels punching divots into my lawn like exclamation points. As the crowd began to murmur, I looked around. Champagne flutes were abandoned on folding tables. Someone knocked over a brochure stand. A kid in a Patagonia vest tried to pocket one of my property maps before I snatched it back. I walked up the porch steps in my porch and unlocked the front door with a key that hadn't changed in 40 years. The wood creaked beneath my boots, just like it did when my father last oiled it. Inside, I headed straight to the old metal war chest he left behind. Buried beneath yellowing documents and a pair of rusted spurs was what I came for, a leather folder holding the original deed, not the scanned version, the full 5-page legal document with one clause that Diana clearly hadn't seen, or hoped I hadn't. In case of contested jurisdiction, it read, Owner retains unilateral veto rights over any third-party claim to land use. And my hands tightened on the folder. I didn't know what she was playing at, but I did know one thing. The HOA had just declared war, and they forgot I still knew how to fight. It took everything in me not to march back outside and flip the entire auction tent with my bare hands. But rage doesn't win wars. Paper does. And I had just found my ammunition. That clause in the deed wasn't just a dusty legal footnote. It was a landmine buried in plain sight, the kind Dana Brookstone had just high-stepped over in her $400 0-cents pumps. I poured myself a half-inch of rye and stood at the kitchen window, watching the last few investors scatter like ants who just realized they were picnicking on a hornet's nest. One guy even dropped his wine glass on the gravel, then tried to act like it didn't happen. Good. Let it sting. Let them wonder what kind of man just calmly walked into his own auction and shut it down with a single laminated page. The next morning, I drove into town with a purpose that made my truck growl louder than usual. First stop, Brazos County Recorder's office. The place hadn't changed since I was a kid tagging along with my dad. Same flickering overhead lights, same stack of 3-year-old hunting magazines in the waiting area. Behind the glass sat Kent Holloway, a sharp, no-nonsense type I'd helped once when his deer lease paperwork got lost in a state backlog. He looked up, recognized me instantly, and said, "What the hell did the HOA do this time?" I handed him a sticky note with my parcel number and said, "Tell me everything Evergreen Summit filed on this land in the past 2 weeks." He whistled low, started typing, and muttered, "Well, hot damn." Turns out, Diana had submitted a zoning adjustment request less than 72 hours after I left town, not just for my land, but bundled with 5 adjacent properties under a vague document labeled Legacy Ridge Realignment Proposal. The kicker? It was marked provisional, but had already triggered a soft freeze on owner modifications. My stomach turned as Kent flipped the monitor around. There it was, a scanned map with my property boundaries redrawn, cutting through my southern pasture like it was some chessboard Diana got bored of and decided to remix. And this here, Kent said, pointing, is a redevelopment initiation notice, not legally binding, but enough to stall any repairs, upgrades, or permit filings until reviewed. I stared at the screen. She filed this without my consent? He nodded grimly. No signatures from you. Not even a courtesy notice. She's playing fast and nasty. My pulse thumped in my ears. Then Kent leaned in, voice low. "You pissed off the wrong queen of the cul-de-sac, my friend." I left the office with a folder of printed documents and a head full of fire. She was counting on me to swing wild, but I was about to play this like chess. Back at the ranch, I dusted off my father's old desk in the study, pulled out every land document we'd saved since the Carter administration, and spread them out like a general planning a siege. I had maps, water rights agreements, grazing permits, and old tax records. For hours, I hunted through the paperwork like I was looking for a vein of gold. And just after sunset, I found it. A topographical map from 1978, signed by a certified surveyor, showing a thin irrigation canal cutting diagonally across the southern edge of the ranch. It split the land into 2 parcels, the main 40-acre tract and a smaller, undeclared half-acre triangle that had never been formally merged. And according to the map's notes, that tiny slice had a registered water easement dating back to my grandfather that meant one thing: it was legally separate. And it had never been zoned. I whispered to myself, "You missed a corner, Diana," and corners are where empires collapse. Just as I was organizing the documents into a folder I labeled Playbook, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ricky, along with a screenshot. "Boss, you're going to want to see this," it read. The screenshot was from the Evergreen HOA email blast, subject line, "Protecting Our Vision." Beneath it, a blurry photo of my barn from the previous day's auction. The caption read, "Lot 6, Future Wellness Center, pending legal clarification. Unauthorized individuals have disrupted progress." Unauthorized, that word again. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, but it wasn't anger I was pushing down, it was anticipation. She was broadcasting her intentions now, doubling down, daring me to stop her. Good, because next time she saw me, I wasn't just going to bring paperwork. I was going to bring the one thing HOA presidents fear more than lawsuits or voter petitions: the truth, with proof. The phrase "pending legal clarification" stuck in my head like a splinter. It was the kind of language that sounds harmless to outsiders, but in HOA terms is practically an act of war. By branding me as an unauthorized disruptor on land my family had tended for 3 generations, Diana wasn't just trying to steal property. She was trying to rewrite history. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that email on my phone, then looked over at the playbook folder I'd assembled the night before. Inside, it was everything she hadn't anticipated. Proof that a sliver of land she ignored was never zoned, never governed, and never hers to touch. I knew it wasn't enough to be right. Not with people like Diana. I needed leverage, something that would make her flinch, something she couldn't ignore or spin into a HOA newsletter. So I went hunting. Not for loopholes, but for a lawyer with more grit than manners. Enter Henry Ashburn, 78 years old, retired once, then came back to practice just to spite the county commissioner who tried to rezone his own driveway. He operated out of a 2-room office behind the gun store, and his ceiling fan hadn't worked since Clinton's first term. But the man knew property law like it owed him money. I dropped the folder on his desk without a word. He opened it, scanned the documents, and let out a low whistle. Well, Willie muttered, looks like you've got yourself a zoning ghost. I raised an eyebrow. Ghost? He nodded. That auxiliary parcel, it's off-grid, off-charter, and off-record as far as HOA jurisdiction goes. You're sitting on a blind spot and you walk right past it like a drunk stumbling through a landmine field. He leaned back, rubbing his chin. Question is, do we go loud or do we go clever? Clever, I said, but loud if necessary. We drafted a notice of property clarification, a fancy term for don't touch my land, and added a legal challenge to any redevelopment claim that didn't explicitly include parcel 42B. But before we filed it, I had one more card I wanted to play. According to HOA regulations, potential investors have the right to request on-site inspections for any lot they're interested in. That included Lot 6, my damn barn, now apparently slated to become a wellness retreat for stressed-out suburbanites. Since I'd been the only one to submit a high-interest bid the day of the fake auction, $1.1 million, cash on paper, guess who now had a legitimate excuse to walk that land, poke around, ask questions, and photograph anything suspicious? Me. Not as Ethan Walker, rancher, but as Frank Delaney, land acquisition consultant from Nevada with deep pockets and a soft voice for zoning irregularities. I emailed the HOA under my alias requesting a private walkthrough of the property to evaluate drainage, easement, paths, and compliance readiness. The reply came from Diana's assistant, some poor soul named Nolan, who probably thought due diligence was a type of shampoo. He confirmed the visit and even offered to accompany me. Perfect. The next day I showed up in slacks, a cheap blazer from the outlet mall, and a name tag that read F. Delaney, Equity West. Nolan greeted me nervously, clipboard in hand, like I might ask him to appraise dirt. We're excited you're considering investment, he said, voice cracking just a little. Evergreen's poised to become the next big rural wellness hub. I smiled. I'm here for the bones beneath the surface. That's where the real value hides. He nodded, not realizing I meant every word literally. We toured Lot 6 first, my barn, now conveniently referred to as Phase 1 infrastructure. Nolan pointed out spots where they planned to install eco-glass skylights and maybe convert the stables into meditation pods. I held my tongue, but inside I was picturing Diana trying to host goat yoga in a stall that still smelled like 20 years of manure and tractor grease. Then I steered us toward the southern fence line. I casually asked about zoning documentation for the far corner. Nolan blinked. That's not technically on the development sheet. I paused and looked down at the dry, cracked earth. Strange. It has a water easement stamp older than Evergreen itself, which means legally that patch isn't yours to touch. Nolan went pale. I snapped a photo of the old surveyor's stake. You might want to update your brochure, I said calmly, before someone else does it for you. He didn't answer. He was too busy blinking like a man who just realized he was in over his clipboard, and that was exactly the look I was hoping for. Nolan's silence followed me all the way back to the ranch, like an echo that hadn't figured out where to land. He didn't say another word after I mentioned the easement, just scribbled something on his clipboard that I'm fairly certain was either a panic doodle or a desperate prayer. When I got back home, I printed the photo of the old stake I'd snapped, worn faded but clearly marked by the county in 1978, and taped it to the inside cover of the playbook folder, like a trophy. That little sliver of dirt Diana had overlooked, It was now my Trojan horse. She might have redrawn maps, invented bylaws, and hypnotized investors with buzzwords like eco-luxury and agri-wellness, but she hadn't planned for this. She hadn't planned for a man who still kept his father's land deeds in a fireproof box and knew the scent of rain by the color of dirt. The next move had to hit hard. Not legally, not yet. I needed to get inside her head, rattle the cage a little. So I dusted off my fake identity, ironed the same $29.00 blazer, and drove to the second investor preview and mixer held 2 days later on what HOA flyers now called Lot 9 Future Community Retreat Space. In reality, it was the ridge overlooking my fishing pond, rattlesnake infested, no shade, and definitely not ADA compliant. But the tent was back, bigger this time, with Edison bulbs strung between PVC poles and charcuterie boards that looked like they cost more than my truck's last repair. I slapped on the name tag, Frank Delaney, Equity West, and stepped into the lion's den like I was shopping for my third vacation ranch. Inside, the same crowd buzzed with entitlement, people who thought off-grid meant having to use a regular key instead of an app. And at the center, once again, was Diana Brookstone, this time in a cream pantsuit with shoulder pads sharp enough to qualify as concealed weapons. I circled the tent like a hawk, dropping phrases just loud enough for her minions to overhear. "I hear the water rights are grandfathered in," I said near the smoked Gouda table. "Big red flag if the county decides to audit." One man in loafers nearly choked on a grape. Another asked if I'd seen the Phase 2 zoning map. I told him I had, and it was ambitious in a legally adventurous kind of way. By the time Diana spotted me, 3 investors were already whispering like 6th graders trading ghost stories. She approached slowly, eyes narrow, lips pursed. In that HOA smile she wore like armor. "Mr. Delaney," she cooed, "so pleased you're still interested." I smiled back, deadpan. "Actually, I'm ready to make a move. Lot 5, full cash, immediate possession, contingent on HOA override authority." For half a second, I saw it. Fear. Then she clapped her hands and declared to the crowd, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have our first firm bid. Evergreen welcomes a bold new partner." They applauded. Cameras flashed. I smiled like I just won a prize pig at the fair. Then I made my way to the investor services table, handed in a bid card signed F. Delaney, and requested immediate deed verification. The volunteer handed me a glossy folder of documents and said, "Ms. Brookstone will meet you shortly." 10 minutes later, behind the tent, I got my meeting. Dinah stood with her arms crossed, face tight as concrete. "You think you're clever," she hissed. "You don't have the money, and when this falls apart, I will sue you so hard your cattle will need attorneys." I smiled, pulled out a small voice recorder, and clicked it on. "Say that again?" She froze, then smirked. "You're bluffing." I leaned in, letting the accent slip just enough to break character. "Funny, that's what people say right before they lose." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not just playing games, Ethan. You're poking fire." She turned and stormed off, heels stabbing holes in the grass like punctuation marks in a threat she hadn't finished yet. Back at home, I uploaded the recording and sent it straight to Henry. "She's threatening legal retaliation, possibly fraud," I wrote. He replied 10 minutes later, "Good. That's the first crack. She's bluffing too. Time to widen it." I looked out across the field as the sun dipped behind the barn, painting the sky a deep burnt orange. Somewhere in that field, my father once said, "You don't win against people like this with anger. You win with patience, with records, and sometimes with a little theater." I poured myself a glass of rye, sat at his old desk, and began printing every document I had, highlighting every false claim, every zoning lie, every redrawn line with a mistake. Because if Diana wanted to sell my land like it was a wine pairing, then it was time someone popped the cork on her entire operation, and I had just found the opener. The next morning, the war got loud. I stepped outside with my coffee and nearly choked when I saw a bright orange notice stapled to my front gate. "Property under review, pending investigation." The HOA logo was slapped across the top like a cheap warning label. Underneath, in bold letters, "All transactions involving Parcel 42 are temporarily suspended until further administrative clarification." There was no signature, no contact name, just the implication that Deanna had found a way to stall me again. This time she was using my fake investor bid against me. By placing an official offer, even under an alias, I'd technically triggered a clause in the HOA charter that allowed for transaction freezes during internal title verification. It was a checkmate on paper unless I found a way to flip the board. But Diana didn't just stop at paperwork. That day, the internet at the ranch dropped out, my mailbox was knocked off its post, the power to the barn flickered twice, then died completely. When I called the power company, they said someone had reported unauthorized agricultural modifications on the property. I laughed into the receiver. "You mean cows?" I asked. "Unless you've got code enforcement rules for udders, I'm going to need that reconnected." It got worse. A local blog started circulating a story titled, "Is Walker Ranch Hiding a History of Legal Abuse?" It included grainy photos of me overseas from 15 years ago, taken when I worked private security during post-conflict reconstruction. They implied I had ties to illegal operations, even referencing a fabricated incident involving land seizures in Afghanistan. None of it was true, but the tone was suggestive enough to make people squint. At the diner, the barista who usually greeted me with a smile now barely looked up. One man at the feed store muttered, "Hope you're not building bunkers out there." Ricky told me a neighbor asked him if the ranch was being fortified. I wasn't losing just credibility. I was being converted into a myth, a local monster story dressed in boots and a flannel shirt. Deanna was playing the long game now. Isolate, discredit, destabilize, and it was starting to work. That night, I sat in the dark, no TV, no internet, the glow of the stove flickering in and out as if the power grid itself was hesitating to stay on my side. For the first time since this mess began, I started to feel something I didn't want to name. Not fear. No, fear was clean. This was something murkier, like the ache in your chest when the roof doesn't leak, but you can smell the rot coming. I poured 2 fingers of rye, sat in my father's reading chair, and stared out the window into the black. My hand gripped the glass so tight the rim squeaked. I whispered, "Am I actually losing?" That was when I found it. Not a file, not a map, and a notebook. Buried behind old tax folders, wedged between 2 dusty ledgers in the filing cabinet. It was my father's. Handwritten, uneven, with pages dog-eared and stained by coffee. Inside were notes, crop rotations, barn repair, soil acidity, but also clippings, articles about HOA lawsuits, underlined phrases like civil overreach and land use manipulation. One line jumped out, circled in red, written in his blocky print, "They only win when you give up your peace before they take your land." I sat there stunned. Somehow he'd known, maybe not about Deanna, but about people like her, people who don't just want property, they want submission. The next morning, I woke with a different kind of clarity. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I gathered every document I had, including Nolan's casual admission that their zoning map was still being finalized. Every voice memo, every photo, every deed, every bylaw. But before I could submit anything to the county, my inbox exploded. 23 emails, some anonymous, some from addresses that ended in things like @civicinsight.org or @policytrend. The one subject line read, "Urgent blog coverage on Walker Ranch escalates." Another, "Evergreen HOA accused of targeting disabled veterans." My name was spreading, but the narrative wasn't mine. It was being sculpted by Diana's PR machine, possibly even some shady crisis management firm out of Austin. They had taken my story and turned it into a riddle no one could answer. A man, a ranch, maybe guilty, maybe dangerous. All I had was a folder of facts and the memory of my father writing by lantern light. I needed something louder, something they couldn't spin. That's when I pulled out the old Royal typewriter from the hall closet. It hadn't seen daylight since Bush Sr. was president. I rolled in fresh paper and typed a single page, not legal, not technical, just the truth. I printed 87 copies, folded them neatly, hand-delivered each one before sunrise, one to every mailbox within HOA reach. The letter didn't beg. It simply said, "My name is Ethan Walker. My family has lived on this land for 3 generations. You don't have to believe me, but you should watch what she does when she thinks no one is looking." I signed it, sealed it, and left it without fanfare. Then I went home, sat on the porch, and waited. Because I didn't just drop off letters, I dropped a match. And somewhere behind those HOA fences and Pinterest-perfect hedges, I was counting on someone to smell the smoke. I didn't have to wait long. By mid-afternoon, the air felt heavier, not from the heat, but from the weight of quiet conversations being held behind closed doors and front porches. Evergreen had always looked pristine from the outside, trim lawns, matching mailboxes, HOA-approved flower beds. But now, something cracked beneath that polish. I drove into town for feed, and an older woman I didn't recognize handed me a folded flyer without a word. It was my letter photocopied, highlighted, and scrawled with the words, "If they can do it to him, they'll do it to us." I saw another copy tacked to the bulletin board outside the hardware store with a sticky note, "Karen ain't winning this one." That night, Ricky knocked on my door holding a six-pack and a grin. "You're trending on Nextdoor," he said, and not in a bad way for once. But the moment that told me the tide had truly turned came 2 days later. During the HOA's monthly board meeting, Diana had moved it to a private conference room at the Evergreen Clubhouse, probably hoping to control attendance. What she didn't expect was for half the neighborhood to show up anyway. Carl Hines, a retired county surveyor who hadn't been seen in public since his hip surgery in 2019, stood up in front of the crowd, holding a yellowed copy of the 1991 zoning map, the original. "This," he said, tapping the paper with one shaky hand, "is the real damn map. And the signature on that fake HOA expansion? Not mine, unless someone learned to forge my arthritis." A ripple went through the room like someone had dropped a stone in still water. Diana tried to interrupt, but another resident, a former HOA treasurer, raised her hand with printed emails showing meeting minutes Diana had never submitted to the county. Someone from the back shouted, "Is this a community or a scam?" Word spread faster than wildfire in August. Nolan, Diana's nervous assistant, quit the next morning, left his clipboard keycard and a sticky note on her office door that read, "I didn't sign up for this." I heard 3 board members got into an argument outside of Panera Bread about damage control. Even the sheriff called me, not to investigate, but to say, "Just so you know, we're getting calls. Lots of them. People want to know why the HOA zoning map doesn't match the county's. We're looking into it." I thanked him, hung up, and stared out at the pasture. The land was still, but something beneath the surface was moving, shifting, ready. The community wasn't exactly on my side, but they were definitely no longer on hers. And in a place like Evergreen, that kind of silence was the loudest warning shot of all. Still, Diana didn't go down without trying one more card. A certified envelope arrived the next afternoon, hand-delivered. Inside was a cease and desist letter signed by Brad Colton, a high-priest HOA fixer known for making problems like me disappear through procedural black holes. "You are hereby instructed to refrain from public commentary that may harm Evergreen's economic integrity," it read, "or else face legal action." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Brad sending paperwork this early in the game meant something behind the scenes was bleeding. I let Hank the dog chew on the envelope for 5 minutes before calling Henry. "We're ready," I said. "Time to go loud." Henry drafted the motion like a man sharpening an axe. We filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office, allegations land misrepresentation, forged signatures, abuse of zoning power, and coordinated harassment. Attached, copies of the fake map, Carl Hines' testimony, Nolan's internal emails, and a voice recording of Deanna threatening legal sabotage if necessary. We didn't ask for money. We asked for one thing, an emergency injunction to freeze all Evergreen HOA zoning activities and open a full audit. The documents were signed, sealed, and submitted by Friday morning, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the war shift. Not a victory, not yet, but the terrain was changing, and in the distance, I saw the shape of something bigger than revenge, consequence. But just when I thought Diana had exhausted her tricks, she played her most desperate hand yet. I woke up Saturday morning to find my gate padlocked from the outside, a county notice stapled to it, "Environmental hazard review in progress. Do not enter." The alleged hazard, a leaky fuel drum that had been sitting empty since 1973. I stood there, padlock in one hand, crowbar in the other, and thought, she's trying to bury me in red tape. But this time, I wasn't just holding a crowbar, I was holding receipts. And Diana was running out of pins to stick in the voodoo doll. I tore the notice off the gate like it was a bandage over a wound that wasn't even bleeding. The so-called environmental hazard, the fuel drum in question, was an old rain barrel that hadn't held anything but mosquitoes since the Reagan era. But to Diana, it was a lifeline. a last-ditch excuse to shut me out of my own property and slow the momentum building against her. I cut the padlock with a bolt cutter and kicked the gate open with a level of theatrical fury I hoped someone was recording. Then I walked the fence line, eyes sharp, phone in hand, ready to document everything. And that's when I saw them, 2 HOA compliance officers, clipboard in hand, snooping near the canal like they were inspecting a crime scene. "You're trespassing," I called out. One of them, a guy with sunburned ears and a badge clipped to his polo, stammered, "We're conducting a perimeter compliance review." "On undeclared land?" I raised an eyebrow. "Outside your jurisdiction?" They froze. Then I added, "You just admitted unlawful entry. You're on camera." I held up my phone. It wasn't recording, but they didn't know that. Back at the ranch, Henry was already waiting on the porch, a thermos of bitter black coffee in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "She hired Brad Colton," he said, not even bothering with hello. I blinked. "The fixer?" He nodded. "The very one. Which means she's either scared or planning something big." He handed me the folder filled with county meeting schedules, court filings, and one very important document, the official summons. Evergreen HOA was being called to a public zoning board hearing next Thursday at 9 o'clock IME sharp to address allegations of fraudulent boundary claims and administrative misconduct. "They can't dodge this one," Henry said. "Everything's on record. They'll either defend it or collapse under it." I stared at the date. 1 week. 7 days to prepare the final blow. 7 days before this quiet war either ended in justice or more bureaucratic limbo. Those next days were a blur of preparation. Henry and I mapped out every argument, compiled every document, reprinted every photo. I called Ricky, who returned with his dog and his shotgun, not to fight, but to help organize. Carl Hines agreed to give in-person testimony. So did a former HOA treasurer who had just discovered that Diana had been using board funds to pay for consulting from a PR firm that coincidentally had ties to her sister-in-law. We even printed color-coded handouts for the zoning board, one of which showed the original map overlaid with Diana's forged version, like a cartoon villain had taken a highlighter to reality. By Wednesday night, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was ready. Thursday morning, I put on the cleanest shirt I owned, the one my dad used to wear to Sunday services and property auctions. The courtroom was a dull beige, fluorescent lit, with microphones that only worked half the time, and chairs that creaked like guilty consciences. Diana arrived 20 minutes late, wearing a navy blue blazer with shoulder pads sharp enough to draw blood. Brad Colton was right behind her, oozing charm and arrogance in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my tractor. The room quieted when Glenn Howard, the zoning board chair, called the session to order. Case 7B, review of development claims in HOA jurisdiction concerning parcel 42 and subparcel 42B. He looked up. "We'll begin with the property owner." I stood, approached the podium, and opened my folder. No theatrics, just facts. I started with the 1978 survey map, the water easement, the deed clause reserving unilateral veto power. Then I handed over the zoning overlays, Nolan's email, Carl's signed affidavit. I ended with a single line: "If Evergreen HOA has the right to seize and sell land without notice, then property lines don't mean anything anymore." And that should scare everyone in this room. A step back, Henry took over, voice slow and lethal. He laid out the timeline like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. When he played the voice recording of Diana threatening legal retaliation so hard his cattle will need attorneys, someone in the back gasped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The damage was done. Then it was Deang's turn. Brad Coulton strutted up like a man auditioning for a courtroom drama. He claimed our documents were outdated, our witnesses biased, and that adjacency granted assumed governance under subsection 12EB. When Glenn asked for proof of that subsection's existence, Brad smiled and said, "We're compiling the full charter." Glenn frowned. "That's not good enough." Henry stood again. "May I submit Exhibit H?" he asked. It was a USB drive. Inside, unfiled charter drafts, internal memos, and a spreadsheet labeled Projected Gains Post-Acquisition. That last document showed projected income from subdividing my land. There was no more gaslighting after that. Glenn leaned forward. "This board finds Evergreen HOA's actions in direct violation of state property protocols. We rescind all development claims and refer this case for formal investigation." Silence. Then a single clap from the back. I didn't look. I just nodded. One more battle left. and Dinah wouldn't see it coming. The clap came from Ricky, of course it did. He was standing in the back leaning against the wall like it was just another day watching cows chew cud, but I could see the pride behind his smirk even from across the room. Dana didn't even turn her head. She stood frozen, lips pressed so tightly together they'd gone white. Brad muttered something to her, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the USB drive still sitting on the table like it had personally betrayed her. The board stood up, filed out one by one, and that was it. No confetti, no anthem, just the sharp snap of justice landing where it was long overdue. I packed my folder slowly, deliberately, then turned to leave. As I passed Deanna, she finally spoke, so low it barely registered. "This isn't over." I stopped, looked her in the eye. "No, Diana, for you it just might be." Then I walked out of that building into the dry Texas wind, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like the land was shrinking beneath my boots. That night, the town spoke louder than any judge ever could. Someone stapled a blown-up printout of the projected gain spreadsheet to the bulletin board at the feed store under the heading, "Evergreen HOA Real Estate Mafia." Another neighbor set up a Facebook group titled, "Keep Evergreen Real," and within 12 hours, it had 300 members. The next HOA board meeting was canceled without explanation. Then came the resignation. Diana Brookstone stepped down from her position, citing health concerns in a one-paragraph email sent at 2:14 a.m. on a Sunday morning. No photo, no farewell message, just digital smoke disappearing into the void. But the internet never forgets. Within days, a meme made its way around the neighborhood. Diana's face photoshopped onto the Monopoly go-to-jail card. Someone taped it to her mailbox. Ricky swears it wasn't him. I don't believe him for a second. The fallout came fast. Nolan, her former assistant, left town entirely and was last seen posting travel pics from Oregon. Donna Ridgway, the HOA treasurer, once voted to fine a neighbor for using the wrong mulch color, was caught trying to sweet-talk her way into a water aerobics class she herself had banned. Marcus Price, another board member, took a job delivering Amazon packages. At least it was honest work. And Brad Colton, word had it his firm quietly withdrew from 3 pending HOA cases once the Attorney General's office began requesting itemized billing records for every consultation he'd charged over the past year. Evergreen wasn't just healing, it was purging. The way a body fights off a virus, it finally recognizes. As for me, I didn't throw a party I didn't need to. I went down to the southern edge of the property, the narrow strip that started it all, and planted sunflowers along the irrigation canal. Just a small row, nothing fancy, not for sale, not for show, just something to grow in a place someone once tried to erase. The soil was dry but rich, and the breeze carried that faint scent of cedar and stubbornness. I wiped the dirt from my hands, looked out across the field, and whispered, "Not today, Karen." A few days later, a letter arrived. No return address, but sealed with a wax stamp that looked like something from a courtroom drama. Inside was an invitation. "Mr. Walker, we invite you to speak at the upcoming Regional HOA Accountability Symposium regarding your precedent-setting case. We believe your story could help ensure this never happens again." At the bottom, printed in elegant serif font, were the words, "The Walker Clause has been officially added to the county's zoning oversight protocols." I didn't plan to accept. I wasn't interested in becoming a mascot for the anti-HOA resistance, but part of me knew that this wasn't just about me anymore. My father once said, "You don't plant trees for yourself, you plant them so someone else can sit under the shade." Maybe he was right. So I showed up, told my story, and afterward, a woman about my age, rancher from another county, came up to me and said, "They tried to annex my pasture last year. Your name came up in the hearing. You stopped them without even knowing." I nodded, didn't say much, just tipped my hat and walked out into the sun, where the land didn't feel threatened anymore. It felt alive. 1 week later, I spotted a drone hovering over the north pasture, not high enough to be casual. I followed it on the ATV until I found a black SUV parked behind the tree line, Arizona plates. I knocked on the window. A man in sunglasses flinched, started the engine, and drove off in a cloud of panic and rental car dust. I took a photo of the plate, called Henry. 2 hours later, he called back chuckling. "Guess who rented that SUV? Brad Colton. Looks like he's compiling case studies for a reputation rebuild, trying to write his comeback story." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. "Well," I said, "he's welcome to write about me, just not the ending he's hoping for. Because out here, we don't forget. We plant sunflowers in battlegrounds, We name loopholes after our family, and we never ever let a Karen walk away thinking she won. Some battles aren't fought with fists or firepower. They're fought with deeds, documents, and the unwavering belief that truth still matters. When someone tries to rewrite your history, your silence becomes their weapon. But when you speak, act, and stand firm, even quietly, you remind the world that land isn't just dirt, it's legacy. It's roots, memory, and identity stitched into the soil. Karen didn't just try to take my ranch. She tried to erase my father's handwriting, my grandfather's boundaries, and call it redevelopment. But the land pushed back, and so did the people. So if you've ever felt alone fighting against something bigger, more organized, or dripping in legalese, don't back down, stand your ground. Because sometimes all it takes to collapse a kingdom of lies is one stubborn man with a folder of facts and the will to keep going. If this story hit home, drop a comment, share it, and let's make sure no one fights alone.